Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're discussing the Midnight movie series. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And this week on the show, we've got David Church from CMCL and Sean Smalley.
Yep.
Yes, all right, I remembered. Who is your library information sciences
That's
student,
correct.
And you work with the actual film archives on campus.
I work at the IUB Film Archive with Rachel Stolce.
Yes.
And I also do some work for John at the cinema.
Excellent, excellent. So we've got these guys here to talk about the Midnight movie series that they helped program, and it's always an interesting episode when we talk about the Midnight movies.
It is.
Because there's a reason they play at midnight. So we're going to get into that here in a little bit. So let's talk about the Midnight movies and a very an interesting set of films. Not many that I've heard of this semester, which is not uncommon for these sorts of films. So I'm going to look up. By the way, I don't know if you guys have seen this. The cinema calendar is now on the iPad.
It is.
You can download the IU Libris app, and I'll post a link to that in the thread. But you know, I've just got my podcast, my schedule here, and I just boom, and then I see more films. So let's.
You're just trying to show off your fancy iPad.
I am actually.
Look, no iPad. I have real paper.
This has a very interesting title: Fleshpot on 42nd Street. Now, this one sounds like a sexploitation. Is it a sexploitation?
It is a sexploitation film.
Okay.
This is one of the ones that we found over the last summer doing some sorting of film cans for the Kinsey Institute.
Yeah.
One directed by Andy Milligan, produced by a New York-based distributor named William Mishkin. And Milligan's do you want to say anything about him? He's a really interesting character.
Yeah, he's a staple of that 42nd Street scene. And our specific interest with this film is that it really does a good job at capturing that environment, an environment that is completely gone. And I actually, when I was in New York, I walked down 42nd Street in Times Square just to see how different it was and how.
Yeah, I mean, what was that environment like? Like, I mean, I'm assuming it was.
It was, very run down. It about maybe 60, 70 years before this film was made, it was supposed to be the big theater district, and Hammerstein had built all these great theaters, and by about I would say maybe 50s, late 50s, it started to really run down. And
even before that.
And so a lot of XXX theaters began popping up, sex shops, all that kind of stuff. And Milligan was kind of at the heart of this.
Yeah, he was a very, very low-budget filmmaker. He started off as sort of an off-Broadway playwright, and he also did one of what was sort of considered an early minor classic of underground cinema, a short film called Vapors, which is really about a relationship between two men in a gay bathhouse. Milligan himself was a gay filmmaker, and so he sort of brings some of that sensibility to play, which we do see reflected as well in Fleshpot on 42nd Street, because one of the major characters is a transgender prostitute. And so she's one of the major players here. So there's a lot of sort of cattiness going on there between how she and a number of the other hustlers on the street are sort of interacting and trying to get by, basically.
Yeah.
But he shot movies on an extraordinarily small budget, usually with a single camera, single microphone, so sometimes it's hard to tell what's being said, depending upon where it's pointed, and lots of shaky cam and things like that. But they're really, really interesting movies. They're sort of playing with bad taste in some ways, similar to what you might see in like an early John Waters movie or even the Kuchar Brothers movie. They sort of verge on the experimental in some sense. I would maybe even compare them to some of the early films that Paul Morrissey did for Andy Warhol, like especially some of the ones about, New York street hustlers like Flesh and Trash and Heat and films like that.
Okay. So that one's on the 28th of September at 11:59 p.m. The next one listed here, Beyond the Black Ranbow. I don't know anything about this, so enlighten me.
I haven't seen the film yet, but it's one I'm really looking forward to. It's kind of a psychedelic thriller, supposed to be set in the early 80s in some kind of mental institution, and I've only seen bits and pieces of it, but it looks just like eye candy and ear candy. It just a film that you want to see in the theaters.
Yeah.
Something you have to see on the big screen to get the full impact of it.
Interesting.
Preferably on some sort of illicit substances or something like that. I mean, it's been described as sort of a throwback to the old 60s head films and things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So it does look pretty interesting in terms of how it's trying to do some sort of retro sci-fi things.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like is this like a sci-fi film? Is that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah, it's a sci-fi film. Apparently it's quite slowly paced. A lot of people have compared it to Kubrick's 2001 in some sense. But apparently, and I haven't seen it either yet, it has some really striking kind of surreal images in it. And
it sounds like it has a really great synthesizer score. So if you really like synthesizer scores, this is the film to check out.
Yeah, and it's by... what's his name? Jeremy Schmidt, who's he's on Jaguar here locally, isn't he? I believe he's signed.
Okay.
I want to say that. I may be wrong about that.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know anything about him, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in the catalog, and I've heard inklings about it. Just I don't even know where, because as soon as I saw the title, I was like, I know that from somewhere. And then I read the description. I was just like, yeah, I've seen a little bit of it, either like a trailer or just maybe like a sequence of randomness, I would assume.
Yeah, I think it was made in 2009, but it hasn't. It just now got picked up for distribution,
Gotcha.
so it's kind of been in limbo for a little while.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I'm definitely going to be there for that one.
Yeah.
I will set the alarm. I will set another alarm. I'll be there.
I will call you on October 19th at 11:20, so you have plenty of time to get there.
You should, because it's the one I'm really looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, and I guess we should say, this one is more recent. A lot of these are sort of like older films that are sort of being rediscovered, but this one's from 2010, so this is sort of a newer release film.
It's by the Panos Cosmatos, who's the son of George P. Cosmatos, I think, who directed a number of films in the 80s and 90s, like Tombstone and things like that.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. The next one listed here, and that one is October 19th at 11:59 p.m. The next one, I'm just going to read the opening line to this because it's the description. Because if you don't want to see this movie after this, then I don't know. Paralyzed in an iron lung, Klaus is a former Nazi death camp doctor hiding in post-war Spain. I love that, paralyzed in an iron lung. That makes me want to see this movie. So this movie's called In a Glass Cage.
This is a really interesting film, a very very intense and chilling film that if you watch it, it will stay with you for a long time. It's one I saw a number of years ago, and it's sort of latched into the back of my mind, and I had to come back to it several years later. And it's really an interesting, sophisticated take on the intersection between power, especially patriarchal power, and violence and desire. Because a lot of it is about sort of queer desires that take place between this guy who's trapped in this iron lung and also this young man who he hires to be his nurse. And we eventually find out, it's not like big spoiler alert here or anything, it's broadcast pretty clearly from the beginning of the film, that this was a young boy that he had sexually abused when during the Nazi death camp era, and so now this young man, because of he's suffered this sexual abuse, it's become part of him. It's maladjusted his identity in certain ways, and so he wants to go back and, through a mix of sort of punishment but also pleasure and desire, reenact things from this death camp doctor's diaries and force him to watch the sort of crimes that he'd committed against young children. So it's about history repeating itself in very cruel ways, but it's also a really sophisticated movie in that it's extremely well made. It's really slick, really polished, really artistic film that's also really about asking us what it means to watch horror films.
Yeah.
It's a very sort of self-reflexive film.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of scenes where when the nurse, Angelo, is forcing Klaus to watch these crimes that he's committing and so on, he mounts a mirror onto the iron lung and basically forces him to watch, even though he says, I have no desire to see what you're doing. I don't want to go back to the past and everything. But it's really an interesting and in some ways powerful and troubling film because it does sort of implicate us ourselves in these very violent scenes. And it sort of asks us to reflect upon what it means to be both attracted to and repulsed by violent imagery and cruel imagery and so on. So it's very much, I think, a really smart film about what it means to watch horrific imagery in the first place.
Yeah. So that one is October 26th at 11:59 p.m. And the last one here, we talked about this when Jim Naramore was here a little bit. This one's kind of an interesting choice for you guys because it's rare that there's sort of like a mainstream movie in the midnight movies. Or if it is, it's something like Grindhouse that's sort of like, more recent. This one is called Cruising, directed by William Friedkin, starring Al Pacino.
Yep.
And I have seen, this is one I have seen, but go for it.
Well, as Jim said when he was on here, this does have a very interesting production history. And actually, before they even started shooting the film, a gay critic from the Village Voice encouraged people to show up on set and obstruct the shoot of the film.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of pressure even before they started shooting things to shut this film down. It's had a very interesting life since it's come out. When it came out, it was seen as homophobic and that it would drive people to commit acts of violence against the gay community in New York. And that really, as far as I know, never happened. But since then, it has become a big cult hit. And at the time it came out, there were some gay critics who accepted the film. The most famous was Robin Wood, who argued that this film kind of exemplified the incoherent text of New Hollywood, where there are competing ideological interests at the film that kind of decenter it and open it up to many different readings that you can't that made it different from the older Hollywood films, where you have a clear narrative, a clear character to identify with. And with these newer Hollywood films, these incoherent texts, they kind of have these little breaks in the text that can't really be resolved in some ways. And I think it's fitting to call Cruising an incoherent text because of the way that many people have responded and reacted to this. So it's, in some circles, this is the ultimate, it's an ultimate camp experience. For some people, this is a very serious and dark film about power and masculinity. Some people are freaked out that the film is touching on subjects like homosexuality, and there was that kind of response too. So on the one hand, on the left, they were upset about perceived homophobia in the film, but on the right, they were freaked out that this was even being put onto the screen. Yeah. So it's led an interesting life. I think most critics today who have reevaluated have seen some of the merits in it. So the reaction isn't quite as hostile now, but it's still a very shocking film to be put out by a major studio.
Oh, yes.
To say the least.
Especially in 1980.
Yeah. And, I think it also challenges our understanding of or gay culture because this is actually a culture that did exist at one point in New York. It doesn't exist, at least as far as I know.
Still does to some extent.
To some extent, but not to the extent that it does in the film. Kind of in the same sense of what happened to Times Square. This community it's not quite as prevalent anymore. So it is kind of a artifact from a period long ago.
Yeah.
Pre-AIDS period.
Pre-AIDS period too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting that basically the film is set up, Al Pacino is a cop, and he's being called into his superior's office, and he's like, sort of standard kind of like cop drama sort of thing is starting to happen where it's like, you got to go undercover. You're the only one that can do this. And there's a serial killer preying on gay men. And so they think Al Pacino is like the type of person that has been getting attacked. So they're like, you're the one who looks like the guy that this guy's attacking. So you get into this subculture and you figure this out. And that's where it takes the turn where you're like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that. This isn't, but I think it's interesting that it takes on Al Pacino is the other. He's the person who's not part of this. He's the one who's sort of guiding us into this. So his reaction can kind of guide our reaction as well. And there's definitely some kind of shocking imagery.
And Friedkin played with this in The Exorcist, where he'll put subliminal shots in the film, and in the murder sequences he plays with that too. I won't give out what he does, but he does a little bit of that. So I mean, it's very the stylization of the film was very interesting too. There's a really interesting play with sound and sound bridges between sequences, sound bridges between characters in these different worlds. The sound bridges that take place between the world of the police and the world of the nightclubs is done in a very interesting way. So there's just it's a very complex, well-crafted film that can work on on the level of camp enjoyment, but also as a serious film, I think it has a lot to say.
When I saw it, I didn't find it camp at all. In fact, I was kind of watching because I thought, oh, this is going to be weird and crazy, and I got to see what how wrong he got all this stuff and how how wrong-headed all this is. But it takes it really seriously. Yeah. I didn't find it campy at all.
Sometimes that the camp value of something is just forced. That this film is so intense that the only way people can deal with it is kind of laughing it off.
So, did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say that seemed to be the reaction that I experienced to it when I saw it when it was circulating a few years ago. I saw it at the Castro Theater in San Francisco, where when it originally came out, there were bomb threats phoned into the theater because no one wanted anyone to see this film and so on. And it wasn't a very well attended film when I saw the reissue of it. But there was, that kind of forced camp desire to want to laugh at things that could be seen as homophobic or politically problematic from a contemporary standpoint, even if some of those things might have been intentionally put in as some moments of comic relief within the film itself, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah, I think the only scene that might constitute any kind of camp is the scene with the cowboy in the police station. But other than that, it's a very dark, somber film.
Yeah. So I want to ask you guys one more thing before we get out of here. Now, a lot of these films are sort of known for being hard to see. Beyond the Black Ranbow just came out, and Cruising I know is on Netflix, so that one's not hard to see. But In a Glass Cage, Fleshpot on 42nd Street, are these like exceptionally rare films that it's difficult to take a look at these?
Well, do you want to say the thing about Cruising? Is there that we're possibly getting an extended?
I spoke with John, and he said, because there's been this story that the studio cut about 40 minutes from Cruising.
Oh, wow.
And a few years ago, actually, William Friedkin showed a restored cut of the film at Cannes. And from what I can tell, it was only 40 seconds longer than the theatrical release. So I don't know if that 40-minute story is true. But John told me that he's been looking for a print of this film, and Warner Brothers said, we don't have one. Which again, since it came out at Cannes a few years ago, I'm surprised. But we did find a copy from a private collector, and on the packaging or something like that, it said uncut. And so we thought, maybe we found I think the running time of the theatrical version was 102 minutes. And he said, maybe we found the 142-minute cut of the film. And it turns out, no. It's just, it probably meant when it said uncut is that it hadn't been cut from the head to the tail.
Yeah.
Which means also that it really hasn't been screened, so we're getting a fresh print of it.
Cool. Excellent. And the other films, or there's anything special?
Fleshpot on 42nd Street, that's one that's pretty hard to come by. Most of Milligan's films were destroyed by his producer-distributor, William Mishkin, when Mishkin was getting out of the exploitation distribution business. And so this one, there are still some prints floating around here and there, but it's usually pretty hard to come by. And we're getting one from the Kinsey collection here. So it may be a bit of a beaten up print, much like some of the ones from the Grindhouse series last fall. But we do have it nonetheless.
Excellent.
And I believe that the only other one worth noting is In a Glass Cage is, I think, a newly restored version.
Oh, okay.
A year or so ago, I think they went back and remastered it. So that's been touring over the last year or so.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that'll cover it for this week. Thank you guys for joining us and telling us about this series. This is definitely a unique series at the cinema. There's nothing else quite like it. You're not going to see films like this in any other series. So we're really excited about that. Thank you, David and Sean. And we'll get out of here. I'm Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.